Welcome to Ali Fitness Podcast, a weekly production all about bringing health into fitness. A former captain of the Ohio State University wrestling team with over 30 years of classroom and industry experience, Don Moxley is an exercise physiologist who uses technology to give his athletes the ability to daily track their performance in strength, cardiovascular, and resilience training programs. He's worked as an assistant professor, coordinated the exercise science program at Urbana University, and developed the initial Human Performance Center at Columbus State Community College. He specializes in understanding and directing individual changes that alleviate suffering and contribute to the betterment of well people. He is currently invested in understanding the role of cannabinoids in the human central nervous system. And that's what I want to talk to him especially about today. Don, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Look, I'm very excited because, in fact, to be honest, I'm over hearing about cannabis. And I'm sure you feel the same, although obviously you're a big believer in it when it comes to recovery and everything else with your athletes. But are you not sick of the overhype of cannabis in absolutely everything these days just for marketing purposes?
Yeah, I think that's the challenge that we as professionals have, is being able to cut through the crap and be able to boil it down to what really makes a difference. And cannabis is unique in the fact that it's regulated on a state-by-state basis. So each state makes their own rules. So literally it changes based on geography. There's really no federal controls about claims and so forth. So you've got this CBD industry that's just completely out of control. But it puts the consumer, listen, there's something there. The stuff works. But its consumers are at a disadvantage of knowing what to use, how to use it, where to get it, and that's one of the challenges that's been interesting to work through.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's why I wanted to get you on the show, to find out exactly that, how and why and where and how do we use it. So firstly, though, can you just give us a bit of an explanation about the difference between cannabinoids versus CBD versus hemp versus THC? There's all this sort of talk about it, and I don't think that it's very clear for people like me.
Yeah, so there's a plant that's called cannabis, and there's different species within the genus, and so there's cannabis sativa, cannabis indica, cannabis rudialis, and really the big difference between the three really vary between the percentage of THC, which is tetrahydrocannabidiol, and CBD, which is cannabidiol. Now, it's important to note that the plant manufacturers, those are cannabinoids. In addition to those cannabinoids, there's some people estimate that there's over 400 advanced pharmaceutical ingredients that grow in this plant, not just the cannabinoids, but also the terpenes. And terpenes are essential oils. This is how most people recognize those. And it's the combination of those two things that make the unique genus and make the unique species of the plant. So to answer your question, a cannabinoid, an exogenous cannabinoid or cannabinoid, is a plant molecule. It's a certain chemical structure, and THC and CBD are two of the dominant ones that come out of the cannabis plant. They don't come out as CBD and THC. They come out as actually THCA. They come in an acidic form, THCA and CBDA, neither of which are psychoactive. And there's some fun stories that go with that, but the long and short is cannabinoids are the THCA, the THC, the CBDA, and the CBD that come from the cannabis plant.
Okay, and you said none of them are psychoactive, so how do they deal with that?
Well, THC becomes psychoactive. So if you take THCA and you heat it, it will do what's called decarboxylate. So it loses a molecule and then it becomes psychologically active. So that sense of getting high comes from THC, not from THCA. So it's only through the process of processing the plant that you get to the point where it becomes psychoactive.
Right. And so and when you say processing the plant, is that only by heating?
I believe so. That seems to be the typical pathway. And when you look at the processing of these plants by the groups that grow them and process them, almost all of them decarb, they bake the product somewhere in their process to go ahead and get that decarboxylation, which from a performance standpoint, I'm not sure is an advantage. And I'll tell you an interesting story. I was at a pain conference down in Palm Beach, Florida, and it was the Florida Society of Interventional Pain Specialists, and we were there exhibiting, and this Jamaican medical assistant comes up to me and she says, we used to grow this in our backyard in Jamaica, and my parents would take it and they would soak it in our finest rum. So not just soak it in rum, they soaked it in their finest rum, she said. And they would take it and they would keep a bottle of this in the medicine cabinet. And when she would have menstrual cramps, they would give her a shot of it in orange juice and it would solve her menstrual cramps. And she said, my father was a farmer and he would come in at night and he would rub this on his knees. So if you think about this is essentially an ethanol extraction of THCA and CBDA, and they were using it in that true medical format. And I always found that story really interesting, and it kind of opened my eyes to this is part of the challenge that we have in the industry, that when a company or when a state legalizes, there's an immediate demand for the THC product. I mean, there's a lot of people that want to buy that product, and growers and processors are going to sell what people buy. But it doesn't change the fact that as progressives, we have to take a look at the plant and its extracts in a non-psychoactive manner to understand the medical value and the medical property. Does that make sense?
Interesting. Yeah, I do question though whether it wasn't the rum that was actually helping the patient in that example.
Well, there's a lot of great research that points to the value of cannabinoids as very powerful anti-inflammatories, very powerful pain remediators. The research on this is very clear. So
I agree. I was just joking about the rum, but my question to you then is: it sounds like what you're saying is that the CBD side of it is a clear advantage, but the THC, in terms of athlete recovery and that sort of thing, there isn't much scientific evidence around that.
Yeah, I think you have to be a little bit careful there. So when we start taking a look at athlete recovery, my particular area of expertise is in measuring heart rate variability and being able to tune that and use that for athlete performance. And, trying to get a boost in HRV is what we use most of our recovery and modalities for like sensory deprivation floating. We know float tanks raise the RMSSD of an athlete. And we know the higher the RMSSD in an athlete is and the HRV, the more successful they are. It's pretty clear. And the thing that really got me into this was I have friends that work in the professional leagues, and we will have athletes that we call get stuck. That typically you're trying to take an athlete through a sympathetic and then a parasympathetic pattern. You're going through this process, this sine wave, for lack of a better term. We're going through this process, and sometimes an athlete will either get stuck sympathetic or stuck parasympathetic. And some of these pro guys are talking about the fact that they'll have athletes that'll go out on a bender, and we all knew what they were doing, and they come back fixed. So we knew something was happening there. And so I'm not saying that consuming THC there's not a benefit there. In fact, I think there probably is a benefit there. I don't think we understand how to prescribe it and use it yet, but more holistically, I think you have to look at the entire plant and the entire spectrum, THCA, CBDA, CBD, and THC, to really start to put together a formulation for optimization.
Yeah, and so have you been sort of playing around with ratios or?
No. Well, personally, yes. I'm spending a lot of time looking at, okay, first of all, it's a challenge when you get into these markets to be able to find CBDA and THCA. So depending on how the plant is processed, most of the time it's decarbed and it's coming out to the general public where you can purchase it decarbed. Finding it in its carboxylated form is a challenge. Now, I found out how to do that. Is you got to find a supplier that uses ethanol extraction, and most of that product has not been decarbed by the time it comes to the public. So now that I can actively get some CBDA. I did some work about 6 months ago looking at HRV and CBD and CBDA, and it looks like there's a little bump there. Now, this is all preclinical N of 1 kind of work, but there's a lot of people that are claiming benefits. I'm not going to tell them it's all based on placebo. So there are good explanations for how it can work. There's some pretty interesting preclinical work that gives us the tools that we need when we're able to do the research to do some clinical work that could be really valuable down the road.
And so what sort of N=1 sort of, I guess, evidence are you seeing?
So on a personal standpoint, I've had 6 knee surgeries. I've got 2 ACL. I have 2 ACLs that were blown out. I've had one of them reconstructed. I've had, 4 other, 2 on each knee. And so my knees are always touchy. I have to be really careful with training load. But I am able to manage all of my pain and inflammation with CBD. I don't take traditional NSAIDs anymore at all. Prior to this, if I wasn't careful, if my knees are pretty juicy, I'm taking 9, 12, ibuprofen a day. I haven't taken an ibuprofen in several years. So there's that kind of work. I've got other kinds. I've got some other athletes that we've talked to. And again, this is all preclinical kind of N of 1 stuff that are using the product in different ways, both topically and ingesting orally, that are getting some real pain relief and some anxiety relief benefits from it.
Wow. And are you seeing any difference between endogenous or exogenous ways of?
Yeah, yes, there is a difference. I don't know that I can entirely describe it, but again, when my knee is juicy and sore, I use a CBD isolate, and this is a CBD isolate is the CBD molecule that's been isolated out of the plant down to about 99% purity. It comes in kind of a crystalline powder. And I will consume that, and it'll go across my sublingual membrane, the buccal in my mouth, and get absorbed. And then I use a topical spray or topical salve as well, which provides a lot of pain relief.
Right. And so just to be clear then, was that CBD or CBDA?
Well, I use both.
Okay. And what the oil itself or the topical, do you make that yourself or?
I've done both. So I've made my own creams, if someone makes something out there, I usually will try it. I'm one of those kinds of people that, let's get it in the mix. Let's figure out if it works. And, but I've made a lot of my own creams too.
Awesome. And Don, I guess that leads to my next question too, because what I'm sort of a bit wary of are all the products on the market. And then when you actually look at how much CBD is actually in the product, often it either doesn't say or it says, but it's such a minuscule amount that it wouldn't even make a difference. What products do you actually recommend, or what ratios or what amounts are you looking for when you look at a product?
So what I have found that's kind of you're exactly right. Your observation is spot on. Is that, one of the challenges is that I can go buy a CBD isolate. If I go buy a kilo of it, I can buy it for $6 a gram. Okay. I see CBD products on the market that have such a low amount of CBD. It may be selling for between $150 to $300 a gram. Okay, so that markup is ridiculous. So being an informed consumer on this is it pays to be informed and to figure it out. I price shop a lot, and I typically don't like paying much over about $50 a gram for my products. I'm usually fighting to get them. Again, I can get it for $6 if I buy, 1,000 grams. I'm never buying that much. So, I'm paying anywhere from $30 to $50 a gram for the products I'm using. So buyer beware on the price and the concentration. The other thing that you have to always pay attention to is that, I can go out and change the oil in my car right now. I can put it in bottles. I can slap a CBD label on it, and I can sell it. And no one knows the difference. And there are so many studies that have been done where states have gone to, whether they're smoke shops or corner stores or flea markets or even dispensaries, they buy the product, they take it back and test it, and they find no CBD in the product. So one of the things you have to do is you've got to be able to track back where this product's coming from. And most quality suppliers will provide what's called a certificate of assessment of analysis. And it tells you where the CBD in that product came from. Was it tested? How was it tested? This is one of the common things you have to ask for along the way, just to establish the fact that you're dealing with someone who's reputable, and you can tell if the product's been tested or not.
And Don, is that information on the label itself?
Usually not. It usually goes side by side in the marketing material. So if you go into a dispensary and you ask for the test results for a COA, they'll usually pull a notebook out and say and associate it. The dispensaries that I work with in Florida, a lot of them have there's a barcode on it. You scan it with your phone, it'll actually bring the test results up. But when you're looking at processors, like I buy a lot of my CBD products out of Colorado. So a lot of those folks have it right there on their website. You click on it, you can see the batch numbers, and you see that they provide the information for you.
Excellent. And then what typically are you looking for in terms of the ratios for, say, a topical?
So some topical combinations that I have found that are really beneficial. This is where THC topically is really nice. I have found I really like a 1-to-1 ratio on a THC to CBD topical. A lot of times in a 1 ounce or a 2 ounce jar, you'll see in a 2 ounce jar, you'll see 250 milligrams of each. And that seems to make a really nice topical cream or a topical salve. I have some experience that shows you may need to get your CBD levels up. I won't be surprised if research shows that you've got to get CBD up to about a milligram per pound body weight per day to deal with some anxiety or some pain issues if you're taking it orally or translingually. I won't be surprised to see that's where the research comes out on that. I know there's some times when I have to get over 100 milligrams a day before I get before I feel the benefit. And I'm not a small guy. I'm little over 6 feet tall, and I weigh about 275, 280 pounds right now. So, it's 5 milligrams of CBD is like, spitting in the wind for me.
And do many of your athletes just want the THC side of it for the benefits of relaxing themselves or feeling a bit, I guess, out of it?
I don't think first of all, I'm not working with anybody right now who's actively using THC in that manner. So just to, so I can't answer your question directly. There's no doubt in my mind that there are athletes using it for that reason. And I also think part of the challenge is, it's been interesting. When I was in college back in the early to mid 80s, the cannabis plant that we had then and the cannabis plants that we have now are very different. The cannabis plants that were around in the mid 80s, late 70s, early 80s, maybe were 5% THC by weight. Well, with the embargo of the plant in the 70s and the underground breeding, we've now bred these plants up to where they're 25 to almost, I think I saw something earlier today that there's a 28% THC plant, which basically you get as much THC in one inhale as you got in 5 before, early on. So the plant has changed dramatically. And the other thing that has happened as they've bred up the THC in the plant, there's also been, it wasn't until recently that CBD was recognized as a valuable asset. When they figured out that it worked with epilepsy and you started to see the breeding of plants for CBD content, the Stanley brothers with the Charlotte's Web products and things like that, you're now starting to see the breeding of the plants to go ahead and raise those CBD levels. So that being said, there's a lot of things about the plant that have changed over time, and you have to be careful about where that's coming from to understand it. We are pretty clear on the fact that there needs to be CBD with the THC in order to get the relaxing effect. We're nearly certain about that. And it looks like some of the best ratios are very high CBD with a moderate amount of THC. That's going to get you the relaxation. It's not going to get the anxiety that comes, because if you have too much THC, you'll start to get an anxious response. You'll get a sympathetic response in the nervous system. And anyone who's used cannabis will talk about, either they or someone have dealt with paranoia or the fear that comes with using the plant. So that's one of those unique combinations that you have to pay attention to.
Yeah, interesting. And so I guess until now we've been talking about how you alleviate suffering through using CBD and THC and whatever else. But what about in terms of performance? I've actually had clients ask me if I smoke CBD before, or if I take THC before a race or something, is that going to improve my ability? And they've read studies on where they can improve their marathon run by smoking. What are your thoughts on that? And I'm talking about like actually immediately before a marathon race, for example.
Yeah, there's been some interesting stuff coming out of Colorado on that I've been paying attention to. Listen, I think you have to be really careful. There's no doubt in my mind. Listen, we understand the role of the endocannabinoid system. The endocannabinoid system in your body is a huge pain moderator. Okay, so there was this great study that came out of Britain not long ago. A gal, she essentially endured surgery without anesthesia, and they were trying to figure out what was going on. And when they went in, they found out that she had that genetically she didn't produce the enzyme that breaks down anandamide, which is one of your endocannabinoids, which is the higher the anandamide level, the more pain cessation you have. So we know that those endocannabinoid systems, and we know with exercise, we know when you exercise, you build up anandamide. That's one of the big benefits of exercise. So the consumption of exogenous cannabinoids will slow the fatty acid enzyme that breaks down anandamide. It definitely slows it. So you keep anandamide in the system longer, which should regulate pain better. And you certainly, this is one of the things, and this makes sense from an endurance training standpoint or from a persistence hunting standpoint, evolutionary. Having that anandamide there to deal with the pain, gave that particular hunter gatherer the ability to pursue their game longer and do that. So that it's really the benefit that we're working off of now. I'm not prepared to recommend lighten up before your race.
I tend to agree. I mean, I think if I had a bit of a smoke before I went for a run, I'd probably want to have a sleep before I went for the run.
Well, I think this is some of the stuff that we've got to get figured out. There's some interesting stuff again. Now that this is coming out of the darkness and into the light, there's some real interesting stuff. There's a lot of endurance athletes. There's a lot of endurance athletes that are going out for their ride or going out for their run if the group, and they're consuming a little bit. I don't think it's fair to say they're getting high, but they're consuming a little bit. And anecdotally, these people are starting to talk about it now, and I don't think you can ignore it. But it's real, and I think it's one of our challenges is to understand it.
Yeah, I imagine there'll be a lot more studies along that way. I can sort of see the science behind how it could potentially help that pain over, I guess, be minimized over an endurance event. I can't see the same thing in terms of, say, an Olympic weightlifter or something like that, where you need that power.
Amy, what's crazy about this is I've taught, I graduated in 1986, and I've literally been in the classroom ever since, one way or the other. I've been teaching exercise science. I did not know the role of anandamide in the central nervous system until I made the decision to go into the cannabis business. When I made that decision and I moved from my old world at Ohio State down to my new world in Florida, all of a sudden I had this awakening. And my daughter is a junior going into her senior year at Ohio State studying exercise science. And I asked her, I said, have you come across the term anandamide yet? She hasn't. It's still not in the curriculum. It's not in the foundational learning. And it turns out when you look at anandamide, it's one of the huge benefits of exercise. We have to understand this to effectively understand exercise promotion and the benefits that come from this. And I don't know about you. Had you heard about anandamide? I
had actually, only from a really good interview podcast. I heard this guy Don talk about it.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, it's for me it's still shocking, and I guess it's evidence that we still have a lot to learn. Again, the molecule was discovered relatively not long ago. It was discovered after I was out of graduate school. We're starting to see papers come along on this, but again, it wasn't until I made the decision to go into the industry that I really did a deep dive into this to understand it. Now it's, my cannabinoid folder on my Dropbox is gigantic. And it's clear to me that we have to understand this to completely understand the role of that endogenous molecule in exercise promotion, in recovery. If you listen to one of my other podcasts, there's this amazing paper that I came across that it takes a look at fear conditioning, and this is obviously in mice. And so that when an animal becomes fearful, there's a drop of anandamide in the amygdala. And this is the part of the brain. The amygdala is the part of the brain that senses fear. And it makes sense that this is the reaction, because as that anandamide drops, this animal then becomes fearful, or what we refer to as hypervigilant. And when we're dealing with stress, and when we're dealing with pain, and when we're dealing with recovery, hypervigilance is one of the big deals that we deal with now. Big deals we deal with. That was really good, wasn't it? And so when I take a look at this, and I'm like, well, no wonder Vietnam vets were smoking so much pot. We took these people, we dumped them into an environment where hypervigilance was the only way they survived. And when they come back, with the work that we were doing at Ohio State, we had some connections to the military and some of the elite military groups. And one of the things that one of the researchers there told me one time is that once someone's set point has dropped to hypervigilance, so once you have that traumatic event that drops this, it doesn't normalize. Okay, it doesn't go back up. And I explain this now that I've seen that paper, is that, that hypervigilance. So whether you had to go to war, or whether you've been sexually abused, or whether you've been physically abused, it's through the process of hypervigilance that you survive. Well, that hypervigilance is a drop of anandamide in the amygdala, and it only makes sense that these people would try and normalize that. Someone who has been abused like that, maybe the only way they can return to normal is through the consumption of exogenous cannabinoids. So whether they're smoking or transdermal or whatever, I think there's a huge opportunity here for us to understand suffering. And listen, suffering exists on the same continuum as high human performance. We're just shifting on the same continuum. We're just at different ends. So this has been one of the interesting parts of my, trip through the world of cannabinoids.
Wow, it sounds fascinating. And so where to from here, Don, in terms of your research and experiments? And are you actually involved in any products yourself?
Well, I just signed on as an advisor to a group out of Portland. It's called the Mendi, THEMENDI, themendico.com. They're going to be launching here pretty soon. And I'm excited to be able to, listen, there is a lot of evidence here. I was in a unique position at Ohio State, and I was able to learn some things that were really valuable, and learning the value of recovery, of appropriate recovery. And I have a very good friend who was a teammate. He's now a physician, a pain management doc, Dr. Ron Garbo, and what he terms intentional recovery. As we train for so long, we've intentionally exercised, we've intentionally trained. I set a time to do my particular exercise. I go out and I do it. And then I just let the world control my ability to recover. Can't do that anymore, particularly if you want to be elite. If you want to be elite, our world has changed to the point that we have natural stressors that are built into our environment that if we don't work to alleviate those, they will prevent your ability to perform optimally. So, listen, we figured out several hundred years ago that if we packed a bunch of people onto a ship with the kind of food that you need to get across the Atlantic Ocean, by the time they get to the other side, there's not enough citric acid in the food that's going to prevent scurvy, which is a vitamin C deficiency. So we understood what citric acid is at that point. Well, we're starting to figure out that we've packed humans into our ships. We've limited our environment to a point to where it is now affecting, and in fact, this has started to be defined in the literature as the possibility of a chronic cannabinoid deficiency. There's a really good researcher by the name of Dr. Ethan Russo that has defined this. And when you look at fibromyalgia, when you look at migraines, when you look at things like that, this is obviously the extreme, but there's no doubt that extreme could, if that deficiency is in someone at an elite level, it's certainly going to limit performance.
Yeah. And so what work are you doing with the Mendi?
So I'm on their advisory board right now. If you're watching the World Cup right now, we're recording this on June the 12th. The U.S. national team won a big game last night. And on that team is Megan Rapinoe. Megan and her sister Rachel are part of the Mendi, and I'm working with them. And we're starting to formulate a cannabis brand. I'd say I want to become the Gatorade of cannabis.
Awesome. And in the meantime, where would you recommend, or more to the point, what would you recommend? Because I know you've tried lots of different products. If someone like yourself has got knee issues or whatever it might be, what would you recommend they do? What would you recommend they buy?
So I think you always start with a quality CBD. It's pretty clear. One of the great things about cannabis is that there's the toxic levels are astronomical. You really can't hurt yourself with CBD if you're getting a quality CBD product. So number one, you start there. Try and find that quality pathway. I don't have a go-to recommendation that I'm ready to put on in the public right now. I can help someone discover, or if they wanted to reach out, I'd certainly refer them to the people I buy things from at this time, because it can change over time. But you want to find that quality CBD. If you're able to find CBDA, I really recommend it. If you're in a state so typically CBDA is hard to find outside of the legal cannabis states. But down in Florida, one of the dispensaries down there makes a CBD concentrate that I buy that, and I just mix that into MCT oil that I buy at Whole Foods and make my own tinctures. So starting to figure this out and figure out your own recipes. Your trick is where do you, and it's like any other food, I can go to a store and buy, food that's not very healthy and raised with lots of chemicals, or I can go buy food that's cleaner and organic and this plant is no different. So your challenge is the states that have it worked out, Washington, Oregon, Colorado, California, those are the older markets that you're starting to see this. CBD now is allowed to be shipped across state borders. So it's a little bit easier to get a hold of quality products out of those states. So that's typically where I'd start.
Awesome. That's really great. And look, before I let you go, I've got a bit of a personal question, but I also want to ask you, is there anything else that you sort of haven't talked about today that you think would be wise for our listeners to know?
Well, as I listened to some of your podcasts after you reached out to me, and I was thinking about that, the point that I would make and to your listeners and to if there's a coach out there, again, it was nearly a year ago last month that I really was introduced to the term anandamide and really started to understand this. And when we look at training modalities and there is so much still to learn. There are so many things out there that you've got to be ready to shed. You have to shed the tradition of what you grew up with to make sure and be able to see what the opportunities are. So I think this is important. No one has the recipe yet. And in fact, there's so much genetic diversity. It changes from person to person that and again, for me, heart rate variability is a very, very important tool in being able to monitor, is what I'm doing leading to the benefit? Am I getting recovered? Am I getting the benefit? Am I growing? And so I think those are a couple of things that are important. Make sure that you've got some tools that you're using that provide you feedback that you're getting a benefit, which may be as simple as a heart rate monitor that you use while you're training, and a heart rate that you also use to measure HRV with, and start to dashboard what you're doing so you can figure out, am I making progress or am I driving myself in a ditch?
Yeah, I love that. And I also love that you use Elite HRV, and I've heard you also talk about the Oura Ring, which a lot of our listeners use as well, including myself.
Yeah, love them both. I mean, Oura Ring, a friend of mine helped them design that, and I have been so impressed with the work that they do. But there's a little bit of a price. There's a little bit of a price challenge there. Elite HRV, it's a freaking free app. If you're training now, and you are training with intention, trying to get something, and you don't own a heart rate monitor, you should stop what you're doing and go to Amazon or go spend the $80 and get a polar heart rate transmitter. It'll talk to the smartphone that you're probably listening to this podcast with. Literally, you can now, for $50 to $80, you can buy what 20 years ago cost us $500 to $700. It is so, and use the Elite HRV app. It's free, and start to dashboard what you're doing and use this information to make good decisions in what you're doing.
Yeah, Don, I like that. And I mean, the thing is, a lot of the athletes do have the heart rate straps, but they're not actually measuring their recovery. They're not actually taking that extra step to find out what their HRV is and their sympathetic and parasympathetic system, and they're not sort of following through with that side of it, which, like you said, you need to be intentional with your recovery. Otherwise, you're not going to get the results that you want.
And if you don't know how to do it, go find, get a coach. I love this is why coaches are so important. So whether it's a psychologist or a tactician or a physiologist, find someone in your community. It can be a little complicated, but the right person will make it very simple. I think that's what good coaches do.
Totally. And Don, do you have a tattoo? Slightly random question, but I ask all my guests.
I do. I've got about 7 of them.
Wow.
So I've got a few.
Tell us about your favorite.
Well, one of my favorites on my right shoulder, there is a artist out of Seattle, Washington. His name's, I think it's Barry Keim. He does a lot of Pacific Northwest Native American art. And most of my tattoos have some kind of a Native American connection to them. So on my right shoulder, I have an orca, which is the Native American symbol for family. And in the teeth of the orca, the upper teeth have my anniversary of my marriage. And then in the bottom teeth, it has the birth date of my daughter.
Oh, awesome. I thought you were going to say in the bottom teeth, it was the anniversary of the divorce, but thankfully not.
we just celebrated our 29th year, and it's a lot harder. It's work. It takes work, but not sticking through it takes more work. So
absolutely. 29 years. That's awesome. Congratulations.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Don. It was really informative and really appreciate your time.
Well, I appreciate the interest, and hope you have a great day. Keep up the good work.
And we'll look out for the Mendi.
Look out for the Mendi. There should be a launch here pretty quick. If you pay attention to my social media, I'll click to most of that.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks. Have a great day.
For all the resources and show notes from today's episode, please go to www.alle.fitness. If you liked today's episode, please show your appreciation by going to iTunes, give us a 5-star review and subscribe.